Hi everybody, it's Linda again and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do something a little bit different than what I normally do. Normally when I record these videos for you, it takes me a half an hour, maybe an hour to write the sample and then 4 days of editing. Now that's just not working for me. So I thought today what we would do is we would try a different format. I'm going to walk you through how I create a sample or how I answer questions over on Stack Overflow. So if you don't know who I am, hello, my name is Linda Lawton. I am a freelance software developer and I answer a lot of questions on Stack Overflow related to the Google APIs. Because of that, I ended up becoming a Google Developer Expert. So I am also a Google Developer Expert. And of course, I have this YouTube channel where I try to help you with your Google development issues. So earlier this week, I saw a question up on Stack Overflow about how to create a user in Google Workspace using Python. So I thought we'd look at that today. The first thing I'd like to comment about is that I am not a Python developer. I am primarily a C# developer. But I have been working with the Google APIs and the Google Client Libraries for so long now, more than 12 years, that I can normally figure out how to make things work. So I've written samples and done videos in C# and Java and even Go, PHP, Python, and occasionally Node.js. Doesn't always work with Node.js, but I try to help people even in Node.js. Now, that being said, this sample would be in Python. So I'm not a Python developer, so if you notice anything that, I don't know, I'm doing wrong, maybe it's not best practice, but like I said, this will work. You may have to fix it. You are, after all, I assume, the Python expert. I am not going to claim to be a Python expert. I consider myself a Google development expert or a Google API expert. So please add some comments down below. Let me know what you think. If there's something I could be doing better, then let's do that. So this is the actual question over on Stack Overflow by the user. And I noticed pretty quickly what their issue was. And I went ahead and posted a response. So let's switch over to checking the documentation. But let's first see what their error, I guess the error was that they're trying to insert a new user and it didn't work. And this is one of my favorite comments on Stack Overflow. If you have an issue on Stack Overflow, tell me what didn't work. Just saying it didn't work is not enough information for me most of the time. It's really nice to know, did you get an error? Did it crash? Did the world end? I don't know. There's got to be something in there. So we don't know because this user did not tell us what didn't work. So let's go ahead and let's switch over to checking the documentation over on Google's Docs page. So we switch over to here. Now, the admin and SDK for Google Workspace is split up into a number of different sections. For user information, it's under the directory API. So I just happen to know that. The first thing that I always do when I want to get a specific method inside of one of the APIs to work is that I go and check to see whether or not they have a quick start for the language that I'm looking for. In this case, they have a quick start for Python, which is really nice. It helps us. They don't have one, for example, for PHP. So in that case, if they didn't have one, I'd go and look on one of the other ones. Drive is very good, for example. They normally have a quick start for most of the languages. So I normally start there. Sometimes I check Gmail and sometimes I even check the YouTube API because as long as you can get the quick start working, you can always switch it over to another API. It's not that hard. So I'm going to let you go through the quick start. All you need to set up your Python, you need to set up the pip managing packages and everything, and you need to go and create an installed client over on Google Developer Console. I have another video which shows you how to do that. The only thing you need to remember to do is to enable the admin SDK API instead of whichever one I originally created that video in. I don't remember which one it was. So once you have your credentials JSON file, then you're all set and you can come back and do this video. Or you can come back and follow it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to copy this sample. That's all I'm doing, I'm copying it. Now we're going to go over to PyCharm. Now I've already got my PyCharm set up. It's already downloaded the packages that I need and everything like that. So that's already set up and I just pasted this in. Now there's a few things about these samples that I don't personally care for. So there's two things that I normally change. Well, that's four. But anyways, there's two things I normally change. The first is the name here. Now, I normally create a special constant for this token JSON file. Now the token JSON is where once the user has authorized, this is where the access token and refresh token will be stored. So the next time the code runs, you're not going to have to authorize this again. It'll always be working for that user. So I'm going to call this token create user. Now why am I doing this? Well, because if you can see over in my project here, I have one main project that's got all of my samples that I use for everybody. And in, for example, my Drive one, I have a sample for uploading, for downloading, for service accounts, for listing files. I have the quit start, like I said. Now, the issue then is that depending upon what method you're using, you would need to define the scope of authorization that you need to request from the user. So in the case of, for example, I want to list files in Google Drive, I don't necessarily need write access, I just need read-only access. But for my upload sample, I would need to be able to write to Google Drive. So I would need upload access or write access. Now, so having a specific token credential file for each one of my samples just makes things easier for me, because if I had authorized it with read-only and then I had an access token that only worked read-only and then I tried to run my Drive upload sample, it wouldn't work. So that's why I like to have specific token user credential variable or constant for each of my samples. It's just easier for me. It's entirely up to you how you do it. You do you. Technically, if you were going to make this multi-user, you'd do the same thing and pass the name of the user. And I missed one. Now, for this to work, I just need to replace all of these hard-coded token JSONs to my new one. Now, the second one I'm going to do is for the credentials file. And that's because, again, I have so many of these samples. I have a credentials JSON file for each one of the samples. I have one for service account, one's for web, one for installed. And this one, because of the fact that it's admin SDK, it's used for Google Workspace. So the credentials file that I have was created over my Google Workspace account rather than my standard Gmail user account, which I use for pretty much everything, just because I have for the last 10 years, and that's the account where I have everything on it anyways. So this credentials file, this is my credentials JSON file, but it's for Workspace, it's an installed, and I call it test everything because basically, like I said, I test so much of this that I basically just have every one of the APIs enabled under library, because then I don't have to go and create a new credentials JSON all the time. I just call it test everything, and it has everything enabled. And again, it's not verified. These are just for development use and testing use for me. So then I take this credentials file and I go ahead and I rename over here. And that's it. That's all I have changed in this original quick start. Now, will it work? Should work. Can't always guarantee it, but let's give it a try. So we're going to run it, and then I'm going to flip you over here. And what's it doing? The first thing it's doing is it's requesting authorization. Okay? So I'm going to authorize this app, hit allow, and it's authorized my application. Let's go back to PyCharm now. And you'll see that it actually ran. And I'm going to have to edit this to remove those emails. But anyways, so it ran. So that's fine. We know that worked, which is great. So let me explain just a little bit of how this authorization works. And we're not going to go too much into it because that's not what the purpose of this. The purpose of this video was to just create a new user. But let's look at it. The first thing it does is it goes in and checks to see whether or not token user exists. Now, after when I ran it the first time, token user did not exist. But now, if you look, it is actually here. This is the file containing my refresh token and my access token that was returned from the authorization process. So the first time we ran it, that didn't exist. So what it does is it goes in here and if it doesn't exist, then we go over here and we try and request a new one from the user. Now, the smart thing about Python is that it allows you to run this local web server, which is really nice with the installed application flow. It's really nice that it does that. So all it does is it checks whether or not the file is there. If the file is not there, then it's going to attempt to reload it, or it's going to attempt to request authorization from the user. If it does exist, then what it does is it just loads it in because it's already authorized it. So it loads that entire file into the credentials. So technically, all it's really loading is it's loading the refresh token. So the system knows that it has valid credentials, and it knows whether or not they're expired or not, and if it has a refresh token. So then that's basically how the authorization works in Python. It's very little amount of code, and it does everything for you. Now, the next thing that we do is we create a service object. All of the Google Apis APIs run through a service object. The Google Cloud APIs all normally run through something called a client, which is completely different. We're only talking about the Google Apis APIs, which are all of the old REST APIs. Gmail, Drive, YouTube, Calendar, all of those older APIs, they use these service objects, and they're quite easy to create. Once you created your service for example, the directory version 1 API, we then run all of our requests through that service object. So all this is doing is it's listing the users on my account, whatever users are in my Google Workspace domain. So this question, if you remember back to the question itself, he wanted to, or they wanted to, create a new user. So now to do that, they were using the services user create method, which seems reasonable, but let's go and check the documentation. So we go back over here and we go under references and users and insert. So to create a new user in Google Workspace, you would use the user's insert method. Now over on Stack Overflow, we see that they're trying to use users to create. Now, I wonder where they managed to get that from. I'm not sure, But obviously, again, didn't work. But anyways, we don't know why it didn't work, but it didn't work. Obviously it didn't work because I don't even think that method exists. So here we go, back to the documentation. So this is what I normally do. I go ahead, check the documentation, make sure that I know what access I need, what scope. So we know that this is the scope that I need, and if we check over again in PyCharm, we will notice that, yep, I'm actually using the right scope, so that'll work. We don't need to change the scope for this method. So back to the documentation again. So it's going to be users insert, but then it has a request body. Okay, so what if we just copy this request body? Well, let's do that. We'll copy the request body back to PyCharm. Now, what are we going to do? How are we going to make this work? Now, technically, if I was going to do this properly, I would do I'd do a list and then check to see whether or not the new user I was going to add actually exists or not already. But because this is just a sample, let's not bother with that. Let's just assume that we know what we're doing and we're inserting a new user. So if we call this new user, and then we paste in our JSON. Now, a user needs a name, right? They need a password and the primary email. So let's get this. Okay, so the user's name will be test, and their given name, or in English, the family name would be the last name and the given name would be the first name. So we're just going to call this test and test. Now, why doesn't it like that, I wonder? And then our password, for password, we are going to say test123 because everybody uses that. And then our primary email address will be testpython@DAIMTO.com. Now, please don't try and email that because I'm going to delete that email after we set this up. But anyways, okay, so there we go. We have our test user. Now, there's one other thing that I like to add when I create users on my Google Workspace, and that is something called change password at next login, and we set that to true. That will mean that the next time that user logs in, when they log in initially for their first login, it will force them to change the password because you honestly don't want this poor person running around with a test123 password, and we all know that they are not going to change their password unless we force them to. So let's force them to do it. So now we're going to use, now what was the name of that method? Let's go back to the documentation again. It was users insert. Okay, back to Python. Now remember, everything goes through the service. So service, users, insert. Oh, sorry, that's a method. Insert, and then we are going to send a body of new user and execute it. There. So we're going to add a new user. There we go. Now, when we run this, all it's going to do is insert the new user. We go ahead. Now remember, originally I only had 3 here, right? So let's go ahead and run it. Now it's only showing 3 again. Now why is it only showing 3 again? That's because this is not an async method. So it's running the insert and then the actual user, the actual list right after. Again, not a Python developer, didn't bother to figure out async. This was just faster. But if we run it again, you'll notice that it is in fact there. We just needed to wait the couple of minutes for it to actually show up. And then it was there. So that's it. That is how easy it is to create a new user using Python onto your Google Workspace account. Again, I would configure this slightly differently. Maybe make it a console app that you could add the first name and the last name and the new email address of your new user, or maybe just a first name and last name, and then it would add together, create your email address normally. You know, could cat everything together and do it for you. And that would work. And you can actually add one other thing, and that is something called a recovery email. So if the user themselves actually has a secondary account, then you can actually automatically configure a recovery mail for them. For example, I have, you know, my Gmail account as my recovery mail for some of my Google Workspace accounts. It just makes it easier to recover it that way. There are quite a few other things, but these are the easiest ones that I think you should add originally. So that's it. Now, again, this is my new format. We are just testing this. I think it went pretty well. It shouldn't take me long to do a bit of editing to comment out all of my email addresses. Honestly, you guys don't need to know all of my email addresses. There is, of course, a email in the About tab on this channel. So if you ever need help with something, I have consulting services. So I'm more than happy to consult on small projects to help you get your Google development working. Oftentimes it's faster for me to just create something for you in a couple of hours, and then you're off and running instead of spending a week trying to figure stuff out. So that should work. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please, if comment, like, subscribe. The Google algorithm seems to like it when people respond and to the channel and help it out that way. I guess that's it. You have a really nice day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.